Good evening, everyone. My name is Liz Joyner. I'm the founder and president of the Village Square. And on behalf of the Village Square and Florida Humanities, we're delighted you've joined us tonight for If We Are Brave with our special guest, Dr. Theodore R. Johnson. This program is made possible by funding from Florida Humanities through National Endowment for the Humanities. It's part of the multi-year series of digital programs, Unum, Democracy Reignited, presented in partnership with Florida Humanities, exploring the past, present, and future of the American idea as it exists on paper, in the hearts of our people, and as it manifests in our lives. Any views, findings, conclusions, or recommendations expressed in this program do not necessarily represent Florida Humanities or the National Endowment for the Humanities. If you are not familiar with the work of NEH and Florida Humanities, we're putting their web addresses in chat. Be sure to check them out. The chat window will be closed tonight, but if you want to ask questions at any time during the program, you can just click on the Q&A link at the bottom of your screen. If you haven't taken our pre-survey yet, if you'll take just a moment to do so now, we're dropping the link into the chat thread too. Your honest and anonymous answers will help the Village Square with a major nationally scoped research project. Even if you've done a survey for another program, we ask that you complete it again this time. We are delighted to welcome streaming partners Bridge USA, USC Center for the Political Future, Living Room Conversations, National Institute for Civil Discourse, Listen First Project, Common Ground Committee, Braver Angels, Civic Health Project, McCourtney Institute for Democracy, Unify, Talking Politics and Religion Without Killing Each Other, podcast, Citizen Connect, Center for the Humanities at University of Miami, Network for Responsible Public Policy, and our wonderful long-term local partners, Tallahassee Democrat and WFSU Public Media. It is now my pleasure to introduce tonight's facilitator, Dr. Nasheed Majouin, Executive Director of Florida Humanities. Dr. Majouin's extensive professional career in humanities includes his past leadership at the James Eaton Senior Southeastern Regional Black Archives at Florida A&M University and the Art Museum and Archives at Hampton University. Dr. Majouin has served on a host of boards, including the Blues Foundation, the Austin Arts Council, Arkansas Black History Commission, Virginia State Heritage Preservation Board, Visit Florida, and the African American History Task Force for the state of Florida. Dr. Majouin is the author of A Contemporary Key to American Optimism, Unlocking the Foundations. Nasheed, it's a pleasure for you to be here with us tonight.
Thanks, Liz. This is a wonderful program. I'm looking forward to the conversation. It's always been great to partner with you and Village Square. It is now my true pleasure to introduce tonight's facilitator, Dr. Theodore R. Johnson, the author of If We Are Brave, Essays of Black Americana. Ted is a senior advisor of New America, leading its flagship Us at 250 initiative marketing the nation's semi-quincentennial, I said it right, and a contributing columnist at the Washington Post. Prior to joining New America, he was a senior fellow at the Brennan Center for Justice at NYU School of Law. He's a retired commander in the United States Navy, serving as a White House fellow in the first Obama administration and as speechwriter to the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. His work on race relations has appeared in prominent national publications across the political spectrum, including the New York Times Magazine, The Atlantic, the Wall Street Journal, and National Review, among others. And important to Ted's bio, Ted is a former special guest of this very Unum series, where he joined us to discuss his extraordinary book, Where the Stars Begin to Fall, Overcoming Racism and Renewing the Promise of America. Good to have you, Ted.
Thank you. I appreciate you guys having me. It's always a thrill to be here.
Yes, yes. So, one of the things that excited me about this book, and thank you for writing this book, is the way you weave your life experiences, the history of America, in explaining and grappling with this concept of Black Americana today. And I'm sure when you sat down to embark on this journey, you had some points of interest or some ideas that you needed or you felt that you had to get across. So let's see how we get there? How did your life bring us to this point?
Yeah, it's I think it boils down to I wanted to make the question of race in America bite-sized, people-sized.
Mm,
When we talk about issues of racial tensions or the history of race in this country, history of racism, or we talk about the effects of structural or systemic racism, these are big, massive problems that took centuries to form, that will take massive movements of policy and sort of cultural shifts to address, and
yeah,
it can feel overwhelming. It can feel like the problem is insurmountable, that there's no amount of goodwill or good policy that can undo the things that racial inequality has wrought. And um and so I didn't want people to feel powerless in talking about race. And one way to do that, in my view, is to sort of pull the personal stories out of the structures, and sort of share the experience of what it's like to live in these systems, or to grapple with history, not as an indictment on the people who came before us or a recommendation on a policy agenda for the next president, but to sort of give people a view into what life is like as
yeah.
a black man in America at the end of the 20th, the beginning of the 21st century, post civil rights, post Jim Crow, post a nation that first sanctioned and then abolished slavery. What is it like to be black in America at this point in time? And again, I wanted to do this without charts and tables and quintiles about where the socioeconomic disparities fall out, and talk about what life is like, sort of grappling with this race question in America and all the ways that it shows up in our lives.
Yeah, and I like that because you come across people, something happens in America, something is on the news, and you're sitting beside someone who is from a different ethnic group or social class or a different part of the country, and somehow they're going to look at you and maybe they're going to assume something, right? And maybe they assume that you have the answer or perspective. And I this collection of essays kind of goes down a path of your youth to
Mhm.
your military experience, to your matriculation at HBCU, and your work in the administration. Somehow, it's almost a 360 view of America, but you split it up, as you say, in bite-sized, digestible means. And I think you tackle identity today, and not necessarily the past 250 years, pun intended, right? The past 100 years, but today. So let's back up a little bit.
Mm.
Your name, Theodore R. Johnson. I think the people should know a little bit about how we got there.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so my full name is Theodore Roosevelt Johnson III. So named after my father, who's named after his father. So all of the three generations share the same name. And I'll tell you, I didn't really grow up understanding the name or why we had it. And it wasn't until my senior year in high school, talking with my history teacher, that I learned about both Theodore Roosevelt and Booker T. Washington. And when I sort of learned the story of Roosevelt becoming president after McKinley is assassinated, and then one of his first actions is to invite Booker T. Washington to the White House, it was the first time in the nation's history that a black man dined with the president and the first family as an equal, not sort of to negotiate politics through the back door like Frederick Douglass had to do with Lincoln, but Washington was a guest of the president. And by the next morning, when the newspapers got a hold of this dinner, a lot of people were very upset about Roosevelt dignifying, basically denigrating the White House by inviting this black man as an equal there. But a lot of folks were very inspired by it, and mostly sharecropping black folks in the South who saw the dinner as a glimpse of what the future could look like if the nation could just grapple with its race problem. So as a result, my great grandparents, they named their third son after Teddy Roosevelt because of that dinner that Roosevelt and Washington shared. And again, this wasn't history stories passed down to me. This was sort of things I had to piece together from
Oh,
census data and family snippets of memories and that sort of thing. So I am Theodore Roosevelt Johnson III because my great grandparents, poor sharecroppers in South Carolina in the 1910s, dared to name their son
wow.
after a president instead of Booker T. Washington, who,
Right.
renowned civil rights hero, but after the president, as almost a claim that there might be a Johnson in the White House one day. Maybe not as president, but it isn't too far fetched to believe that maybe Black folks dining as equals in the White House could just be sort of a standard occurrence in the future. And they didn't live to see the day, but their dreams proved true, and I'm sort of proud to carry that legacy in the name.
You said they didn't live to see the day yet. So, you have a
Oh
family
no,
and you may run, we
no,
may.
no, no. No one will ever live to see the day that Ted Johnson's running for office. But I will say this: during my year as a White House fellow, I was in the Oval Office with President Obama and my classmates, and got to tell him the story of my name and
Oh,
of my grandparents and great grandparents. So their names were spoken in the Oval Office, and it's maybe that was the dream that they kind of had, and who will know? They passed long before I was born, and even my grandfather, he died before my father even met my mother. So I didn't meet any of the folks where the naming sort of begins. But I do believe that the dream has sort of lived on through through generations of the family.
so I'm going to write this down. Ted Johnson, your name and legacy was spoken in the White House. Yeah,
Yes.
that's
Absolutely. Yes. Yes. The faith of my great grandparents. Again, children of enslaved people, Southern, South Carolina sharecroppers,
wow.
um, believed enough in this dinner to name their kid after the president. And 100 years later, their great grandson was walking into the White House, into the Oval Office with the first Black president of the United States. I mean, there's a poetry in America, and that's sort of what I wanted to bring out in the book, not just in the stories and the history and the experiences, but also in sort of the prose and the language. There's a cadence, a rhythm, a poetry to it, because I think that's the story of America can be a poetic one if you're honest with it.
So there's a couple of things there that resonated with me in reading your book that you've mentioned a couple of times about this dinner gatherings, being from the South, being descended from sharecroppers. I'm from the South. I'm from the Arkansas Delta, and
Mhm.
this concept of the kitchen table, where you are picking up crumbs of identity, values, and you in the gatherings, the picnics and the family gatherings and the barbecues, that starts to introduce us to some of the tapestry that makes Ted Johnson who Ted Johnson is. And I think uh that kind of resonates. And that was my assumption, that you were saying that the values of people begin at home. And so if you could speak a little bit to that.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And this is not specific to Black folks. This is not
Right.
specific to America. This is a human attribute, I think, where a lot of the rearing of the next generation happens around food and around family and sort of the wisdom of elders, as much in the words as in the way they cut their corn off the cob, or the way they snap beans, or put a hog on the grill. It's a complete education in life, beyond just sort of the what you get out of the education system, or what will make you money later in life. It's how to live, how to survive in America. So you're absolutely right that I begin there, because food is, and this is also something I wanted to do in the book, is not always just hammer on the contentious issue, but on
Right.
the other aspects of human life that's shared no matter what your positions are. And so I opened the book talking about being in the country with family at a 4th of July cookout,
Yeah.
and being the men are outside, smoking a hog. The women are inside, waking the sides and the desserts and the food and all the kids and the activity around, and how that in itself is an education in life, and really a civic education. Where do you fit in the world? How do you make it in this world? What is your people's history? What is your people's story? What are the expectations of you? And how can you make your people proud and sort of add to the legacy? And when it happens around food, I just think our guards are down. It's not about being right. It's not about winning the day. It's about belonging and connecting, and again learning who you are and where you come from.
Yeah, there are some pillars there, that you set up, and the understanding of church and spirituality,
Right.
the question or the ability to question or not to question, should you have the license to do so, and the decisions that you were faced from, growing up in the South and eventually deciding entrepreneurship, military, or college. And so if you could speak a little bit to where you were and how you came across some of those decisions.
Yeah. So churches, I knew church as soon as I knew life. My parents had us in church from day one. And I think the first 18 years of my life, certainly by the time I was in elementary through high school, I was in church 3, 4 times a week. There was choir
Oh,
rehearsal and youth night and Bible
yeah.
study and Sunday school and the sermon and then food afterwards. So we were a church going family. We were Baptist, but it was more like a full gospel church. So it was church where people were speaking in tongues. People were
Yeah.
falling out. Old school ushers wore white gloves. I mean, red carpet. Like it's a Southern Black Baptist church.
Yeah.
But the thing that I think one of the things I grappled most with in growing up in the church was that you just really couldn't ask questions that were too piercing or too direct.
Mhm.
And so, at some point the answers don't do anymore because I said so, or because that's the way it is, or the Lord
Right.
works in mysterious ways. After a while, that ain't good enough anymore.
Right.
But the rearing in the church just gives you a foundation. I don't know. It gives you like a set of values, a set of principles, and gives you something concrete that's never really changing. And so, whenever the world throws new things at you, it served as kind of a rock. And even if I didn't believe every single tenet of everything the pastor said, I had enough faith to understand that the world is bigger than me, that I've got a place in it, I've got a purpose in it. And I don't know what exists beyond here, but whatever it is, I, I need to do my part in sort of fulfilling why I'm here in the first place. And I bring up religion in the very first essay, mostly because what I'm asking the reader to do throughout the book is to question their
Right.
priors on a series of on you name the political issue. I want people to question, why do I believe this way? Why do I feel this way about affirmative action or the police or voting rights? Where did I get those beliefs from? Who did I inherit them from? Have I interrogated them and determined that I actually believe it? Or have I just taken someone else's word and used their faith as my own and have not really questioned it for myself and come to a set of conclusions and on my own? So I sort of and it's a very personal chapter, both questioning my faith, and I talk about losing my mom,
Yeah.
because again, if I'm going to ask readers to question all of their priors, I kind of wanted to model that
Yeah.
behavior for the reader up front, both on democracy, the point of America, and sort of the point of our place in America, and sort of the in this time at this point in our lives and in the nation's life. So the faith piece is extremely important for that reason, as well as all the cultural pieces. You get to know me and my family as I talk about us in church. I don't have to describe life in the South for you to understand what life in the South is like as I talk about the cookouts or church. It just sort of comes through in the ether.
Yeah. Fun fact, my grandfather and father were preachers in the South, and that question of whether you agree or not, you knew that there was a movement and there was a wave. My grandfather was a hooper and holler. You know what I'm talking about, and so he would sing and get everybody moving. And
Right.
there would be just one scripture at the beginning, and that would take the entire sermon. And he told a story about my dad, and this would be the questioning: what you should and should not do. They had a little group where they would sing, and they ended up before church fighting for the four guys fighting in the pew section. And
Wow.
so that brings me to a point that you shouldn't be fighting in church, but it brings me to a point
Well,
in your book, in your story, something happened with you as a youth at the altar. So yeah, they helped to transform your path and your perspective.
so we're also a very religious family. My grandfather, Theodore Roosevelt Johnson Sr., was a preacher, and I have uncles that are preachers. I now have aunts that are preachers. So the church has always just been a part of life. And so the expectation was not just going to church, but at some point, especially in the Southern tradition, like you have to go get baptized to
Right.
actually get salvation. Like it isn't enough just to go to church because and your parents are good, so you're good. You have to sort of do it on your own. So that in itself is a little bit of a journey. But look at it, these churches Sunday afternoons just before we all wrap up. The pastor usually calls people forward if they are looking for special prayer or if they'd like to join the church or give their life, to Christ. The sort of the traditional ending of a Sunday sermon. And so I went up because I felt like I needed to be prayed over, and I wasn't quite sure. I didn't have a question. I didn't have a problem. I just felt the need for I needed something, and I
Right.
didn't know what it was. And I felt like the altar call, that's where you go find it. So, long story short, I was sort of waiting for magic. The magic never happens, but the preacher sort of, as he's wrapping up with me, he sort of goes around this oval here and praying for each person and anointing them and stuff. And he says to me, he looks me in the eye and says, "Teddy, God has a special plan for your life." And I mean, I was 12 years old, and I
Mm.
still remember vividly those words, and I never forgot it. And the reason I make a pretty big deal of it in the book is because I believed what he told me. I believed that there was a special purpose for my life after he told me that. I don't know what it was. I don't know what it is, but I believed it
Right.
exists. And that alone was something I could anchor to. And I write about no matter what life threw at me, I knew at the end of the day, I'm supposed to be here and God's got something for me to do that only I can do. And it was really grounding. And then, stuff happens, then you got to wonder like, God, what are you doing? This is what part
Right.
of the deal. And you start to question some of that faith. But again, I make a big deal of it because I think we all have to, at the core of each of us, let's talk about the country and our democracy. If you believe democracy is a good thing, that is an article of faith. It's it is good because we make it good. It's not inherently good. It's not divinely, it hasn't been granted to us as a gift from God. It's only good because we made it that way. And so believing in its goodness and our purpose in keeping it that way gives us a role to play in it. And it's the belief that's the core of it. It's again, it's not that it's objective gospel truth. It's that our faith in it is the thing that makes it work. And that's sort of the major takeaway of the first chapter, in life and professions and religion and our democracy. A lot of our big issues boil down to both values and then our faith in that the course we're pursuing is the right one and true to what we're here to do.
You kind of you take you start the book off first is if we are brave, and I'm like, what am I about to get into? And
Right.
we start out with this taboo, and you take the mystique out of it, questioning what is faith? What is the role of faith? If you don't understand or believe in the scripture, you hold it true to you regardless. And you move into this point of identity, and we could talk about at some point W.B. Du Bois, the consciousness, because I really think this is a parallel for you and the soul of Black folk. But you move into this um, uh, identity question and opportunity, and the military, your career, which is fascinating to me, that you ended up being a commander and you're coming from the South in growing up, you got the 70s, 80s, and 90s where we're post-Vietnam in those,
Mm,
that era. And one of the things you said in the beginning of this talk, we're post-Jim Crow, post-Reconstruction, post-civil rights. Now, we're post-Vietnam and all the beatnik, all of the black exploitation, all that's we're saying behind. Where are we now? But you decided that the military was for you. And that's a point of identity and not necessarily something that's pervasive today. I would like you to share a little bit about that.
yeah, yeah. I didn't grow up in a military family. My parents were
Yeah.
IBMers. My grandparents on both sides. My mom's from Georgia, my dad from South Carolina. Core sharecroppers, and my parents were the first generation to go to college. They went to an HBCU, Shaw University in North
Ah,
Carolina, and IBM at the time was looking to diversify its workforce. And so they were, when you want to diversify your workforce, especially if you're looking for black, workers, you go to HBCUs because
ah,
they have, stellar candidates. They're college educated, and so that's how my parents ended up at IBM. So I grew up like a Huxtable, two
ah,
college educated parents
yeah.
working at IBM. We moved around a little bit, but mostly in North Carolina from the time I was young on. And so I always thought that would be my path too. I would go to college, I would get a good corporate job, I would stay at my corporate job for 30 years and raise a family, and life would be good. But when I got to Hampton University,
Hmm.
um, the military kind of came calling for the same reason IBM came calling to my parents. The military was trying to diversify their officer corps, and
Ah,
the military officers, you have to have a college degree, 98% of the time to be an officer. And so if you want to increase the number of black officers, you go to HBCUs that have that produce college educated black folks. And so I ended up getting connected with the Navy, had to pass the battery of tests and interviews and background checks and all that stuff, and went to the military. And I'll be honest with you, I didn't go to the military because I was rah rah patriot. I didn't go to the military out of sort of like a religious national. We weren't so Christian that we believe Jesus was American too, and like
right.
this is what we do in America. We go to church and then we join the military. It was. I can have a job when I leave school. I'll have a guaranteed paycheck for at least 4 years because that was the time I signed up for, and I'd have a chance to get money for a graduate degree and access to a VA loan to buy a home someday. So it was very much an economic decision of a kid who didn't want to graduate college and then go back and sleep on his parents' couch while he figured out
Yeah.
life. But the other part of this, and I'd be curious to your sense of it if this came through, is the military is very much a rite of passage for me into manhood. Because my parents did such a good job in raising us, I kind of felt like things came easily. Like I didn't have to struggle, and maybe I don't know if that's uniquely like a working class thing or a Christian Puritan thing or a black thing or a Southern thing. I'm not sure, but I felt like I had to go through something and earn my way
Ah,
into adulthood. And the military was sort of a way of proving to myself. My parents couldn't help me get through the training. They couldn't help me pass those tests and the
right.
swimming and all that stuff. And so it was both to provide an economic, some economic stability for myself and be independent, but also to prove to myself that I was a man, that I had what it took to make it on my own, that I didn't need mom and dad every step of the way. And what was supposed to be a 4 year career turned into 20 years and 9 months. And it was the best decision I could have made for my life. At 22 years old, 20-year-old Ted Johnson needed the
Wow.
structure of the military to ease that transition into adulthood.
Yeah, there's two things that and you asked me a question there, and so the way it came across, first the setup of this traditional understanding of the kitchen table, the family gatherings, going to church, having a lesson provided to you in the church, black or white or brown. That's something that someone can identify across the country. And so there's this traditional American type of upbringing. You mentioned the Huxtables, the parents, the rise of the black middle class, where here you have, the two parents that went to college and now they're providing the structure. And you're saying that you needed structure, that your structure was provided. And so it did come across to me as a break. This is
Mm,
a separate path, a new path, a personal opportunity for agency, actually. You gave yourself a
mhm,
license to be Ted Johnson when you're actually Ted Johnson the third. I caught
mm,
that. I'm a junior, but I really didn't you forced me to reflect. Am I following a path given to me, or am I on an individual path? And so, again, we
yeah.
get to this consciousness that we talk about, and I compare it to the soul of Black folks again, but you also came across a conflict. We can get into this. Do you have to have love of country? You have a love for country, and you come into these situations with the police, and
Mhm.
you're in the military, and you're African American. You are in the military for a variety of reasons, but you come across this traditional, um, pervasive conflict that maybe the military didn't allow you to escape as a Black man.
No, that's exactly right. It's so interesting. I mean, so one as a junior, I think you'll sympathize with this when you're named after someone, especially when the person that grow up with and walking around, and this is the example of, okay, this is what a man is, or this is what a father is, or this is what it means to to be named after someone. You kind of want to make a name for yourself. I
Yeah.
didn't want to just be the little version of my dad. I wanted to be me. And the military, you're right, was a way of both. It was the rite of passage and manhood, but it was also a personal journey of like, who is Ted Johnson?
Yeah.
Not the
Yeah.
son, the grandson, but like as his own person. And the military definitely helped me find that. And so it's interesting. Like the program I came in the military, I had to enlist at 19, and then I just continued to go to college, graduated from college, and then went to officer candidate school. So from the age of 19, I'm in the military, and over the course of the next about 20 years, was pulled over by police 30 to 40
Wow.
times. I'm talking twice a year on average, one to two times a year for 2 decades. And a lot of times, especially, the older I got, if I showed them my military ID when I got pulled over, that sort of, I would get off with a warning, and that would be the end of it. And so my interactions with police growing up were basically none because we were
Ah,
out in the suburbs,
right.
and the police I got the standard spiel, they're here to protect and serve. But then I was a junior in high school when Rodney King is beaten, or actually, I was a sophomore when he was beaten, and a junior in high school when the policemen were acquitted for
Right.
for beating him, and the riots and that sort of thing. So I started to get a sense of what it meant to be Black in America in the '90s. That wasn't just a derivative of what it meant for my parents to be Black in the Civil Rights era. But I think the experience of the '90s, and as a driver, Black man in America, pulled over by police, my experience became my own instead of Black people are treated in America in XYZ way because we saw it happen during the Civil Rights Movement. If so, my version of Blackness wasn't a child of my parents' version. It became my own version, my own set of experiences. And in the chapter on sort of police brutality and the abuse of state power, the goal was to show that even if you serve the country, are willing to die for the country, you are still seen as more likely to be criminal, more likely to be suspicious. I mean, look, when I was speechwriting for the chairman, I went over to the mall right across the street from the Pentagon to buy some polo shirts, and I'm still in my uniform. And
Ah,
I'm getting two or three
right.
shirts. I'm walking in the dressing room, trying them on, coming out, two or three more in the dressing room. And then the store securities follow me around the store, and
Right.
I'm in uniform. So it's not even the cloth of the nation
Right.
protects you from the stereotypes that people have of Black people, and so there is a kind of patriotism that both makes you willing to die for the country, and to really despise the way you're viewed by folks in the country simply because of the color of your skin, that even outshines the uniform and the medals that you have on. Your race just enters the room before you do, and doesn't change much just because you're in uniform sometimes.
Yeah, the uniform speaks to a consolidated one nation perspective, one identity. Everyone pledges allegiance to the flag, right? Everyone stands up and understands there's a Bill of Rights and Declaration of Independence. We all are a part of that contract with America, and then you come across a separation from that when you're within those threads. And so, and this relates directly to a question from the audience. And can you help us think of ways? This is a progressive question. Can you help us think of ways that we can make progress on race, even though there are definitely polarizing elements in our society?
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
I mean, it's a big question, and I fear the answers are the easy answers are so big that they also seem, impossible to do. So one is, there are absolutely policy solutions. I mean, even Martin Luther King said, I can't make a man love me, but the law can make him not lynch me. That's a
Yeah.
valuable addition to life. Is to pass a law that says you can't do this, or you will be, death penalty or put in jail for the rest of your life or something. So it isn't always about hearts and minds. Sometimes our basic safety is just a matter of a law saying you can't hurt me, and if
Mm.
you do, being punished for the action, and that deters a lot of bad behavior. So there are policy solutions in education, around housing, around health, real concrete things that can be done to make opportunity more equal or more accessible to more folks. But a lot of it is just a matter of people behaving differently because that's the right thing to do, or because it's not in their interest to treat people differently. So the example I give is, after the Civil War, we passed 13th, 14th, 15th Amendments.
Right.
13th abolishes slavery, 14th creates birthright citizenship, and the 15th says that you can't discriminate on the basis of race when it comes to voting. And so um, those laws are passed. The 15th Amendment is 1870, but it's not until 1965 and the Voting Rights Act that Black folks in America can truly participate in our democracy. So 100 years after the Constitution is amended to prevent race from being something that disqualifies you from
Yeah.
participation or targeted, we finally get access to it. And that goes to show that even if you change the Constitution, if you don't enforce it, or if you don't check people's bad behavior, the rights the Constitution guarantees, you still can't access.
Mm.
And so if we think the solution to racism is just passing better laws, then you can do that. And if the people don't believe in it, or if they don't live up to it, and aren't required to, nothing changes. Conversely, I think you can have bad law. And if the people and folks are willing to sort of live by the spirit of the law instead of trying to find the loopholes in the letter, then a lot of the racial inequality we see, I think, will be addressed. So this is sort of a long way of saying that the one thing you can do on a regular basis
Mm.
to try to break some of these walls down is basically get to know someone who's not like you. All of
Ah.
the research shows that I think for white Americans, it's 90, or it's upwards of almost 90%. And for Black folks, and Black folks and Hispanic folks, it's just over 80% of our social circles. Our closest social circles are people of our same race, or in our same class. And so we socialize most with people who look like us and who about make the same money as us. And that means that our exposure to people who are different from us much more rare. And if those folks are demonized, and it's the reason you don't have a job, or the reason your schools are bad, or the reason the neighborhood looks the way it does, is because of those people. If you don't know any of those people, you become very susceptible to the stereotypes about those people that others lay on them. But when you know people from those communities, you can say, I actually know
Wow.
people, yeah, and sort of let that roll off your back. So that means getting out of our comfort zones and going to places where white people going to places where they are in the minority.
Mm.
It will be uncomfortable. I can tell you as a black person, it is uncomfortable being the only black
Yes.
person in the room. It is absolutely necessary
Yeah.
in order for us to have the kind of social cohesion or civic belonging in the country that we need in order for it to be fair and just and democratic and all those sorts of things. So the best thing you can do is get to know people not like you. Go to the grocery store on the other side of town.
Ah,
Go to a different cigar bar or put yourself in spaces where you're not surrounded by people who look and believe and talk and make just as much money as you do. And
right.
I think that's one of the things the military does. Colleges and schools can do this. It to me, that's the best hope for the future of the country is for us to get to know each other better in places that are pro-social, constructive, and not only at the other end of the people we're pointing at.
Right. So be comfortable with being uncomfortable.
That's right.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
a big country. It's a
Yeah.
diverse nation. Like you have to, even if you're white in Massachusetts and go to Idaho, you will probably be uncomfortable. It's a different way of life out
Right.
there.
Yeah.
That's good. It's good
Yes.
to for that exposure. If you want this experiment to work, you got to know the people that you share the nation with. You can't just see them only through cable news or only through the lenses of other people.
Yeah. I think it's healthy and it speaks to a quote in your book. And I'm curious about it. I have a perception on it as far as consciousness again, but rooms teeming with second glances and unseen glances. Can we talk about how you got to that quote? It's poetic. It's it's retrospective. It's reflective to me, I think. But let's explore that.
Yeah, it's especially in the military, it just puts you in places that you would never be otherwise. I've been to Pakistan with three-star generals and to fancy dinners in Australia with dignitaries and diplomats. And I'll tell you, it's something to walk in the room as the youngest and often, especially when I was an aide to a general, a speechwriter or something, the only black person, and you can sense when there's a pair of eyes on you. Like what is
Mm,
he doing there here?
right.
And
Right.
it's not hatred. I don't want to make it seem like people are looking at me like someone needs to remove him now. He doesn't belong here. But it's just sort of like, huh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
And um, it, I'm sure there's a ton of research and sociology behind this, and I unpacked some of this in that in the first book. In this one, this is more about what does it feel like to be the person being watched.
Right.
The W.B. Du Bois asked the famous question in Souls of Black Folk.
Yes.
People would come up to him. He was, I think his mother was white, his father was black. I may have the parentage mixed up, but he was half black, half white. So he was often in places where there were all white people, especially in New Hampshire, I think, where he went
Yes.
to school for sort of secondary school. But it was like a Valentine's Day event or something, and everyone in the class is passing cards around. And as he's passing his cards around as the only black kid in the class,
Mm.
his cards are refused by the girls
Oh,
because he's black. And then he talked about growing up, and people would see him places, and now that they know who he is, they would say, "Oh, I know a fine colored man who served in the war," or "I've got a fine colored man who was my father's friend." And he says the question that's ever unasked in these interactions is, how does it feel to be a problem? And that is
oh,
the feeling. When
yeah.
you walk into a room and that second glance that you catch out of your peripheral vision, or the sort of weak handshake and the averted eyes when you're introduced to people,
Mm.
that is the question that plays in your head. What did I do wrong? Why am I being treated differently than everyone else? And when you look around and you note that, you're the only one who looks like you in the room, you begin to recognize that people's interactions with black folks or people's beliefs and stereotypes or whatever about black folks, those are all with them when
Mm.
you show up. And so
Right.
sometimes there's not much you can do in a short interaction to change people's view of whatever group you belong to. If they have a feeling about that group, it's hard to reverse that feeling. But the the book is about understanding that feeling doesn't go unnoticed.
Mm,
That it's it's sensed by the people you're interacting with, and that absolutely has just can have effect about on your sense of belonging and
right, right.
your ability to feel like you can succeed in some of these systems.
Well, it's if you are brave enough to be, if you are brave enough to be comfortable being uncomfortable, and if that's the case, then you are cognizant of your surroundings because sometimes you navigate these circles and you don't know that the eyes are on you, and that consciousness piece, Soul of Black Folk speaks to me. And we often talk about double consciousness, but your situation is triple consciousness as an African American, but also a military commander in the U.S. Navy. And that compared to this question of the perils of democracy. You love your country, but can you question what's going on in the country? Who has license to do that? That dichotomy. Coming from the rural South, I also come from the rural South. There's an assumption that you're a Democrat. There's an assumption that all African Americans are going to vote one way. There are no independent. They're all Democrat, and they're rarely Republican. But that's not true. Can you speak? Because you hit on that a little bit too.
It's something, I write in the book that I was first eligible to vote in 93. That's when I turned 18. And I didn't vote until 2008. So I was 33 years old before the first time I cast a vote. And of course, that was when Obama first ran. And I kind of felt like I have to be part of this moment. So I have to go get registered and cast a vote. And I checked out of democracy. I mean, at Hampton, Jesse Jackson would come and do voter registration drives.
Yeah,
So it wasn't that I didn't know about the importance, wasn't I didn't know about the history. Some of it was I didn't think democracy made a difference. I thought it I thought like, look, if you can get a college education and make good money, you basically have a lot going for you. And where
yeah.
democracy under delivers,
Mhm.
your quality of life can maybe over deliver. But the more of it was I was in the military, so I kind of said, look, I'm doing my part. Like I'm
Yeah.
contributing to democracy by
Yeah.
serving. So I never felt pressured to vote. I never felt a responsibility, pressure. But it was once Obama started to run for president, I realized, wow, this could be, and then, John McCain, Navy guy,
Yeah.
really kind of a centrist, certainly at that time. And so I kind of felt like these are two folks that I will actually pay attention to what they're
Yeah.
arguing for, what they're talking about, where the positions are,
I was
and
there with you.
participate in this election. Yeah, it was just,
Mhm.
too many parts of my identity were being hit in this
Yeah.
election. And the other part of this is, and this is again part of the same essay on voting. My dad was one of those. Basically like a Booker T. Washington Republican. One of those folks who believe in self-determination. I don't need the government to help me do anything. I need them to get out of my way and just let me make money. I know how to work. I know how to hustle. I know how to take care of a dollar. So if they just get out of my way and let me do that, life will be good. And my mom was sort of a traditional a Democrat, so she believed in sort of a heavy government presence and ensuring racial equality. But their politics weren't all that different.
Right.
Education was important, church was important. They wanted to live in nice neighborhoods. They wanted the kids to do better than they did. I mean, they wanted the American dream for themselves and for their children, but they voted in two different parties, and then their son didn't vote at all.
Wow.
And so I sort of talk,
Right.
and so in this essay, I talk about the journey of voting for Black people in America and
Yeah.
how that journey, under the same set of circumstances, if you're Black in America, it almost doesn't matter where you're Black.
Yeah.
That you're Black is usually the most important indicator, certainly
Yeah.
post civil rights. And so, despite the same shared history, we land in three different places in 2008. But ultimately, in eight, we sort of all cast our votes in the same way, and that was my um, sort of my first foray into participatory democracy. And And I'm almost ashamed. I am ashamed to admit that I sat it out that long because the number of people, the sacrifices, and the number of people who bled, sweat, and died to extend the right. The least I can do is honor that sacrifice by participating.
We talk about democracy, and Tristan in the comments asked the question if your view of America has changed since your first book, When the Stars Begin to
Mhm.
Fall. And you mentioned 2008 and McCain,
Mhm.
and that moment when, if you question democracy and you looked at Republican versus Democrat, and John McCain listed values in Obama in his rebuttal to inflammatory, comment toward Obama. And this wasn't about Republican versus Democrat from this veteran, this prisoner of war. This was man to man, and the values that were listed. And so that actually that makes me wonder, from 2008 to 2025, that pathway of where we questioning democracy. We had an opportunity to vote either way because Obama was a relatively new politician, and so what is the value of your vote? You write the book When the Stars Begin to Fall. You're ripping up this concept of racism and putting it back together for us to examine it objectively. And now here we are. So are you staying the course? Thank you, Trish, for this question. I like it. Are you staying the course or have you diverted?
I'm staying the course. There's no question about it. The other thing I got from the Black church is an endless sense of optimism. It's all going to work out. The Lord, He may work in mysterious ways, but ultimately He works for those, to the good of those who love Him. So, even though I'm not really religious now, I carry some of those life lessons with me that it's if you're as long as you're alive, it's too late to give up.
Yeah.
You gotta stay the course because you've got a responsibility to pass on. But that said, whereas I think I used to think about race relations in America as like a concept to be explored and a phenomenon to be, sort of picked apart. Since in the last few years, I realized that I feel more that I'm not talking about something that was and that is that exists in the abstract, but that the examples in history that I recount in the first book are experiences I'm living through today. So
Oh.
Jim Crow is gone, but police brutality isn't. Voting poll taxes are gone, but voter suppression isn't. So you begin to I have a better sense now that I'm living in history
Mm.
rather than an examiner of
Yeah.
it, and that hasn't harmed my optimism, but it has increased my realism exponentially. And so now I think I used to ask a lot of the country because I would say if I can pull it apart and see this is kind of the core of the issue, what are we waiting for? Why can't we fix it? And now I have a more realistic view of the nation we are so interest driven as a nation, as groups of people, as communities that sometimes those
Yeah.
interests trump our responsibilities or our compassion for other people. So I think I have a deeper appreciation for our place in history and I have a lower expectation of what I expect the country to do today or tomorrow. But my optimism about the potential of the country and what's in the art of the possible if we get our act together, that's not changed at all.
Okay. Well, here we go. Yeah, I'm gonna pick at you a little bit, Ted.
Oh, good.
Okay,
Please do.
so we're from the same fraternity, Omega Psi
Mhm.
Phi, put that out there. And one of the things we looked at was truth, where you get your truth and about truth. And so we're talking about optimism and democracy. There's a quote, there's a perspective in your book about democracy going to hell in a handbasket. So
Right.
let's play with that polarity. And this is kind of coming out of your question, Martin, in the audience about polarity. And so, how do we reconcile? How do we reconcile this?
Yeah. Yeah, and so that line comes from. I mean, every day in the newspapers for the last 5, 6, 7 years, there's an article about democracy dying. Democracy's dying.
Wow.
It's fraying, sliding into autocracy. That so democracy's been on this deathbed for a little while now. I mean, there's even How Democracies Die was a best-selling book. It was a very good book too, just a few years ago. And so I say, okay, well, if we're going to hell in a handbasket in democracy, is there anything that can be done so that it doesn't happen?
Ah,
And the first book says there are some policy things we can do to address this if we understand the history and the things we need to fix. This book says it's that if we're in the handbasket to hell, if we if we make it there in that basket, that's part of that's on us. Like we got to get out of
oh,
the basket, or we have to sort of change the direction. We can't,
yeah.
and so the point is, we can't be passive participants and democracy crumbling. Like we can't just assume everything's going to work out. It's going to be it's inevitable that America will always be the strongest nation, the most progressive nation, or the most equal nation. We take these things for granted, like people didn't die and bleed and sacrifice for where we are now. So democracy can die. There is no guarantee that we're going to figure it out and make it
Right.
successful. In 50 years, this may be a very different country, but it doesn't have to. If I come from people who lived their entire lives enslaved before the Civil War,
Yeah.
and they still got up every morning.
Yeah,
And
yes.
you know what I'm saying? And
Yeah.
for them, democracy was already in hell.
Right.
For them, democracy, if they would see where we are today, it's come far, far, far from
Right.
hell and on a very different trajectory. So that both explains my optimism, but I'm also a realist about it. So I don't assume that democracy will be here forever. It's going to take active faith and work for us to preserve it and pass it on, a better version on to the next generation. But it will go to hell
Yeah.
if we don't do something about it.
Well, it speaks to, there are a couple of points you made, but it speaks to responsibility. Whose responsibility is
That's
it
right.
to save democracy? So you have this experiment, you have an understanding of what it can be. Is it on a path or has it been on a path toward a utopia? Is that achievable, pipe dream or not? But if you have optimism, that means there's somewhere you would like to go. But whose responsibility is that? Because we say democracy, we're in a democratic republic. We
Hmm.
elect people to represent us, right?
Hmm.
And so you handing over the power to this individual to say things on your behalf. And so that person has power and some responsibility, but we have too. So there's a conflict there in the consciousness. Can you speak to that a little bit?
So you're right. There's a democratic republic, and I think part of when we think about whose responsibility it is to save democracy, we I think the inclination is, well, it's our elected leaders. I mean, that's why we sent them there to practice democracy, to protect democracy, to expand democracy, and so the problem with that construct is you expect the republic to save the democracy. If we're a democratic republic, oh, don't worry, they're going to make sure I can participate because that's what I sent them to Washington to do.
Right.
But that assumes that when folks get elected to office, that they are still thinking about your best interest when
Mhm.
they show up. And all of the poli-sci research going back to 1800
Yeah.
shows that parties and leaders put them and their interests first above those of the average American, and business interests are even placed above the interests of the average American. So the republic is not going to save democracy. The republic is important to pass laws and enforce laws to keep the bounds in place, but democracy is our responsibility.
Mm.
If our elected leaders decided tomorrow, you know what, we want to go back to pre-1920 where women couldn't vote, they can do that. They can pass a constitutional amendment and do that, and it's up to the people to say, wait a minute, that's not what we want.
Right.
The people, on there's been Supreme Court questions on affirmative action, on
Right.
abortion, on a range of contentious issues.
Mhm.
And then when they bring those issues to the states tend to vote differently in the sort of ballot initiatives that are direct democracy than how the republic has legislated or sort of examine the issue in the courts. So democracy is our responsibility. It's not going to be a gift to us. It's not going to be rolled out, on a red carpet for us. The path to preserving it is not going to be made easier because we're us. It will be guarded by those in power, just as it was when the country was founded. And we cannot expect those who are in elected office to do all of the heavy lifting to make our democracy work. It just has to come from us, both in our social interactions with one another and our expectations of
Right.
government.
Yeah, so then we get to this thesis that's floating around that democracy is in trouble, and we're back to this responsibility of the people versus those we put in power to protect it. Now we're at accountability. So if the person that you put in place to champion your ideals and goals does not hold true to the path that you put them on, then how do we reel them back in? And when did we do that? If there's there's a moment that this is not what I paid you to do or elected you to do. How do we reel that back in? What are the tools we have? Is it the kitchen table? Is it the ballot box is a cyclical, it's 2 years, 4 years, what happens in that interim period? What can we do? Whose responsibility? That's the challenge. I'm here to learn now. I really want to know
Me
what.
and you both, brother, because I
Yeah.
don't I'm not sure. So, I mean, look, the Constitution, of course, has its safeguards built in around impeachment
Okay.
and that sort of stuff, but it never works. I mean, impeachments have happened, but no president has ever been removed, convicted post impeachment because of partisanship. And so, so saving democracy, if you rely on voters keeping their elected representatives in check, it's just too slow.
Mm.
And so you get into things like protest or other ways that people can exert boycotts, can exert pressure. And this is, the civil rights movement is often used as sort of a template of how to change the country from outside of government, but it's basically people using their money and
Ah,
their time and resources to organize or boycott things or demand march protest demand things of government. That's how change will happen. But I will say that it's the structures really make it difficult. Most of the districts, congressional districts in the country, are already pre-decided before the candidates are even named. They're already
mm,
heavily red or heavily blue, so that I think in the last elections, something like only 20 of the 430 plus seats in the House were competitive. Everything else was, if you're a Democrat in a district and you win
right.
the primary, you're going to win the general. If you're a Republican and you win the primary in districts, you're going to win the general. And
Mhm.
so, how do voters keep Congress in check when elections are basically decided by primary voters
Mhm.
and not by the masses? That similarly, the Electoral College doesn't take the popular vote and translate that into electors. It takes a statewide winner takes all vote and translates the popular vote into a statewide vote. And sometimes that means that states make different choices than the people do.
Right.
And so the more barriers you put between the people's voice and the ability of that voice to be expressed in the representation, the
Okay.
more insulated the republic is from the demands of a democracy. And that's where, again, movements, protests have to be sort of arise and then be sustained in order to change the country or
Okay.
protect democracy. It's very difficult, long-term endeavor, but look, we're 250 in. It's yeah, it's too
Yeah.
late to turn back now. Yeah, we're on the road.
We're 1 year away from was it Thomas Paine's Common Sense,
Mm,
and so but in your first book, like an according you expand and bring back this question of racism and where it is in America, and now you expand and you bring us back to the structure and systems of democracy. And there's this phrase that I love, pews of democracy. Can
mm,
let's see if we can run through that. I
yeah.
think the audience will benefit from your examination, and when this book becomes the top of the New York Times bestseller list, I think
Take it.
Views of Democracy is going to resonate once you explain it. So let's go down that path.
So Pews of Democracy sort of connects to what we were talking about earlier about democracy being an article of faith. It only works because we believe it will. I'm only the Lord only has a special plan for my life if I believe it.
Mm,
If there isn't some special plan and I either believe it or don't, but this plan is going to happen nonetheless. No, in order for it to be special to me, I have to believe the thing is special. In order for democracy to work, we have to believe that it's a legitimate, functional, fair, just way of organizing our decisions and our country. And so you have to be a believer in it. You can't just be a practitioner of it. It's not enough to just go vote and do community service on the weekends and say, okay, I've done my part for democracy. You have to believe that it's
mm,
the right way for the nation to govern itself. And a lot of the polls are showing now, over the last decade, especially, that it's young people have a decreasing sense of faith in democracy because
right,
they don't see how this system can deliver on their ass of government when there's the people in power or the cycle of elections or the low number of folks who vote or the gerrymandering or the money in politics or the electoral college. All these things mute their voice, and so they lose confidence in it.
yeah,
But Martin Luther King was 26 when he led the Montgomery bus boycott. And so maybe he wasn't a believer in democracy solving things overnight, but he
mm,
was a believer in fighting for access to the ballot. He was a believer
right,
in fighting for equality in America. So he had faith in democracy too. He had faith in our system of government too. And I have a dream. He says, look, all we're here to do is cash a promissory note. Y'all promised us in this Bill of Rights and the
right,
Constitution and Declaration that we have these certain unalienable rights. All we want to do is get those. That's it.
right,
We're not
yeah,
asking
yeah,
for too much, right? So he was not just a man of religious faith, but he was a man of American patriotic faith by demanding the very rights that the Constitution guarantees. But
mm,
if you don't believe the Constitution can deliver, if you don't believe America's worth fighting for, the United States is worth, improving, then democracy has no chance of making things better without any parishioners. You got to
right,
have seats and butts in the seats in order
yeah,
for
yeah,
a participatory democracy to really be reflective of the nation.
yeah. So faith-based politics or morally convicted politics, and you touched on something about a generation that does not believe in democracy and its power and its utility. But
That's right.
you got the right to vote and did not vote to, you said 33.
I was
Something,
one of those young people.
yeah, yeah. So
That's right.
you live that
Right.
military, you live that, but something made you stand up. We were there for a second, but there's something made you say, "I believe."
Yeah.
Can we go back there for a second? Because that's if someone, as a matter of fact, I went to. It was so early last week. I went to a breakfast. I got there at 5:45.
Mm.
The Martin Luther King breakfast. You go to, and there was a nice lady that sat beside me and said, "What do you think can help this country if you had a chance to talk to the young people who will be in control of the next generation?" She was an educator, so she set me up. I'm sure but something moved you, and
Yeah.
somebody's listening to this at some point that's 27, 26, and in 4 years they'll be at that point where they're in the early 30s, ready to vote,
Yeah.
an opportunity just like you. So let's go back there. I want to make sure this resonates.
There was never an epiphany. It wasn't a thing that happened that suddenly flipped the light switch on for me, where I went from not caring about participating in democracy to suddenly it being a passion. But I think a few things happened. One is I became a dad, and
Ah,
so,
mhm.
in the 90s, when I'm just young high school or college kid, young military guy, the, you know, there was time to do everything.
Right.
I was going to live forever. It was just there was no sense of urgency and almost no sense of responsibility to anyone beyond me. Remember I said that joining felt like a rite of passage. I finally became a
Yeah.
man.
Yeah.
I became like determining, independent, and so I exercised. I cared about me, and
Yeah.
not sort of narcissistically. I mean, I was in the military, so service was still very important. The fraternity
Mhm.
service still very important, but I felt like I would do my best in the span of my control. And what
Yeah.
happens in Washington? Beyond my span. What happens in the governor's house, beyond the realm of my control. And so I'm gonna let other people worry about that. I got this.
Mhm.
But for me, it was becoming a parent. You realize that life, taking care of you ain't enough. That you have
Right.
responsibilities to other people. And the best way, one of the many ways you can leave a legacy is participating in the systems that's going to govern the people that you leave behind. If
Uh,
you're fortunate enough to live a long life and outlive your kids and stuff, or I'm sorry, your kids outlive you,
mhm.
then
Right.
you're going to leave them a system in place that's going to govern their questions about economic fairness, housing access, quality schools, safe neighborhoods. And I didn't want to check out and say, well, look, I picked up trash on the highways a few days a week and served in the Navy. So good luck to you in
Right.
this America.
Right.
I wanted to be part of that democracy. And then the other thing I would say is it's very important to have good candidates running.
Mhm.
And a lot of the times people's faith, there's a great study from the Knight Foundation that looked at the 100 million people that don't vote in presidential elections and
Right.
why they don't. And a lot of times it is, I don't have faith that my vote makes a difference. I don't have faith that the candidates are who they say they are and will do what they say they're going to do. And I don't believe that my voice is going to be heard over the voice of the wealthy or organized business interests. And so they check out because they feel disempowered. But what good candidates can do is to give people a sense of agency and that they'll be heard. And so we should structure our government to incentivize good candidates to run and not candidates who are only seeking access to power, proximity to power, those sorts of things, but folks who
Right.
put the country first.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a
Yeah.
question in the comment, and we talked about it briefly. Well, we hit on it a little bit briefly, but we are about to start to examine, review the experiment, the 250th birthday, or the anniversary, or the review, or even an opportunity to dismantle and look at a rebirth of something. But every time there's a birthday, just like a new year, there's an opportunity to reimagine. Are we at the point yet, or are we at this point where it's time to reimagine democracy?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. The Democratic Republic that we're operating in was designed in the 18th century. And
Hmm.
then we've amended it to make sure more people could access the system. But we haven't done major sweeping changes to the system itself. The
Hmm.
last Pew poll I saw from a few years ago said that two-thirds of Americans believe that that our democracy is overdue fundamental redesign.
Ah,
And by that, they usually mean making it easier to vote, getting rid of, introducing fairness into the system and getting rid of like gerrymandering and dark money, that sort of
right.
thing. So I do believe at 250, it's the perfect time for us to do so. Whether we
Okay.
will or not is a different question. The next July 4th, 2026, that's the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence. So that's the founding date. And a lot of times, just like you see every July 4th, it's a celebratory event. We're going to go shoot fireworks. Someone will read the Declaration, or someone will give a big speech about the founder's vision and how it may not have been perfect, but we've grown and gotten better.
Mhm.
And then we'll eat hot dogs and then go home and do it again next year. And then some of the plans for 250 are the supercharged version of that. Can we do tanks, parades, and can we do flyovers, and can we do
Right.
sporting events and all these things? What our approach, what the way we think about it is pride, reckoning, and aspiration. That
Oh.
the 250th, the semi-quincentennial, is an opportunity for us to be proud of how far we have come. I may have even said this the last time I was on, but look, I'm a Black man in America now, 2025. Much prefer being here than a
Mhm.
Black man in America in 1825. very
That's
different experiences.
yeah.
That didn't just happen. That wasn't inevitable. That wasn't a gift. Again, a lot of people died and sacrificed for that progress, and we should be proud of that progress that the nation has come as far as it has. The second part, the reckoning, it means we also must reckon with both the shortfalls historically that still have lingering effects, and contemporary shortfalls where we've not lived up to who we said we are. People that believe in equal rights and that government derives its power from the consent of the governed. We need to close the gap between who
Mm,
we say we are and who we actually are. And then the third piece, aspiration, is if you have a vision for America and I have a vision for America, and in your vision, I'm a nobody, and in my vision,
mm,
you're a nobody, we're not aspiring to the same thing, even if we both have dreams for the
right.
country. So for the aspiration, it must be a shared aspiration of what tomorrow holds, not a
Oh,
policy agreements, but is there a place for me in your America? And every American should sort of look at someone who's different from them and say, is there a place for, the person from another party, the person who disagrees with you about abortion or about
mm,
church or about same-sex marriage? Is there a place in America for them to express that belief? And is there a place in their America for you who believe, who has different positions? As long as there's not violence and safety isn't threatened and that sort of thing, there should be a place for us to debate ideas and then agree to abide by the decision. But if your America only has 40% of the country in it, that America won't work for the next version of us. And we've been in that one once, and it didn't turn out well. So the aspiration means we have to believe that there's a place for each of us in the next version of who the country can be,
right.
and then we can debate how to structure it or what it looks like.
So is that the democracy, that book that pulls off the shelf? This your quote, what is democracy? When we pull the thing off the page and affix it to our country, and we get into the values we proclaim versus those elements that we can interrogate in democracy is it it challenges this concept of utopia. We may never get there, and I keep
You
mentioning
won't.
that, but
That's right.
but but you know, do can we see? Can we chart a path? Is there a path that allows this dichotomy of of views? People are going to not like each other. People are going
Yeah.
to see things that they're going to teach their kids what they believe at the kitchen table, and then they're going to go out into the world, whether those beliefs are something we agree with or disagree with, but they're neighbors. They're neighbors, and they're going to the same grocery store. What is that page we're pulling out of the book of democracy, or that book that's pulling off the shelf? Where are we trying to get to?
I think you have to agree that there's a place for people different than you in the America you're trying to build.
Yeah,
If there's not a place for people that don't believe like you, think like you, then what you're trying to build is not the American dream. It's not
right,
the fulfillment of our democratic republic and these high-minded ideals. It's something else,
right,
and whatever that something else is, you got to own it if you don't think 60% of the country should have any rights, or if you think people who disagree with you on any given issue shouldn't have a voice at all, that they should
right,
just sort of be quiet. So taking democracy off the page and affixing it to our lives
right,
means it's sort of that same sort of idea of extending the same grace to others that you would expect for yourself. It's the golden rule, but the civic version of it. If
mhm,
love thy neighbor like you love yourself is sort of it's a religious rule. I mean, that's a rule that sort of permeates different religions said in different ways. The civic version of that is the rights that you enjoy, everyone else should be able to enjoy those rights as well. I think you're right that I don't think we're ever going to get to the nation that completely fulfills
right.
the potential of what this could be. So we may never reach the North Star, but as long as we're just sort of
Mm.
trudging along in that direction, I think we're doing the best we can. Um, and what is that the North Star? I think so. I hate to keep bringing up King again, but it's just
Oh, yeah, fine.
yeah, it's a familiar
Yeah,
point of like it's just very familiar to folks. And I have a dream. I think he lays out the vision for what that looks like. When he says, be judged by content of character, not the color of our skin.
Mhm.
People assume that he's talking about race not mattering. We'll be a colorblind nation. We don't have to talk
Right,
about it anymore. We could just be Americans and not be hyphenated Americans or whatever. He's not saying that at all. He's not. He's saying that he didn't want his daughters to be or his children to be judged by the color of their skin. They
Mhm.
still going to have color on their skin. They're still
Right,
going to be in the world with that skin. They just don't want to be judged by it, but
right.
they can still be appreciated for it or respected in spite of it if you've got a race problem. So it's a colorblind America is not the fulfillment of an America that's overcome racism. It is the
Mm.
America that solved racism is the one that sees me as a black man, understanding my history, understanding the nation's role in it, understanding how to make things better, and treats me just with all the respects and rights and stuff that everyone is due. And
Right.
that to
Oh,
me is the fulfillment when you see race and treat folks equally anyway, instead of not seeing race. Therefore, you extend grace.
I'm going to be purposefully redundant here with that in repeating something that you were saying because I want to make sure it resonates. And I'm going to be speaking about this from this talk I learned from you tonight to a lot of people going forward. Um, Martin Luther King was not speaking to color blindness. He wanted us to be okay with looking at someone and saying, this person over here has melanin in their skin, or they're Asian, but just by looking at that person does not mean I know that person. I need to get to know that person. I need to know my neighbor, the creative culture, their background, the cuisine, the folkways, the stories they have, the kitchen table. They're from Seattle, Washington, Nebraska, Texas. The chili is different in St. Louis than it is in North Carolina. You know, we have to take the time to get to know Ted and Nasheed, not just because we're both bald black guys, we're completely different, and I want to make sure that resonates. And so we're gonna turn this corner into the last segment here, okay?
Okay.
And first, the audience, I want to make sure, these types of conversations we want to continue, and we want to refine these conversations and get guests to come on and reflect the questions that you have. Speaking to the audience, and so you filled out a survey at the beginning of this program, and for us to get a good assessment of what we're doing here, we need you to fill out a survey, the post survey of takeaways. That's why I was redundant. I was trying to kind of weigh the scales there a little bit, but I want, because there's some things I want, there's some takeaways. We are looking at some things in this world with some policy changes. Some people agree, some people disagree. We're looking at self-reflections, state by state by state. And within those states is you have in our state in Florida, there are populations that you anticipated voting one way and they didn't, and that's
Mhm.
because there was an assumption that uh, all African Americans are going to vote one way, the Hispanics were going to vote a certain way, and we're dead wrong, And so there's some quotes as people are filling out their surveys. I want to put to you as we start to round this corner. Um, and they're beautiful sentences. The future of the country cannot be uncoupled by its view of us, referring to Black Americans.
Mhm.
Are we its people or its problem?
Mhm.
Yeah. And then also, um, how do we keep from accidentally giving permission to this American idea that cannot be realized without us and it cannot die without our permission? That piece, that part about permission, that sent chills down my
Mhm.
spine. But earlier you talked about the problem, the problem and the permission. Those are 2 points I want to see if we can help to round this corner here.
Yeah, and so it's a play off of Du Bois.
Yeah.
This question of how does it feel to be a problem, and the one I love Du Bois. He's my favorite writer. Souls is my favorite book, but he the problem, the way he frames it means it's to suggest that we are a problem to America or for white people. Like we are their problem because we're here, of our presence here,
Mm,
and we can't be solved without being removed. Even enslaving us wasn't a solution to a problem, it's so our presence is the problem. But what I tried to say is, um, I think the problem that we present to the country is it can't operate without us. It never
right,
has been able to. Since the founding,
right.
we're here essentially, making the engine for the nation's economy, certainly the Southern economy,
Mm,
and for much of the nation, going into, once cotton and tobacco and stuff started to take off, rice and that
yeah,
sort of thing.
yeah,
So it can't function without us. It's never been able to. It's never proven that. It's proven that it can't, in fact.
that's right.
And so that's the problem. If there are people that you have subjugated, and no matter what you do, the country that you want for yourself, you can't have without them.
Mm,
They present a problem to you, but that is power for them.
mm,
That means that the nation's destiny, we have a voice in it. And there's nothing that any other group or government or anything anyone can do to take that voice away from us. We've been here as long as the country's been here. There's almost 50 million of us now, 45 million or so. We're not going anywhere.
right,
And the other part of this is we don't have anywhere else to go. This is home.
right,
The African Americans are, I mean,
right,
almost a different ethnicity now. It's just like Nigerians are not like Ghanaian. African Americans are a different ethnic group.
right.
We are a different people, different culture, different history. So this is home. We're not going
Yeah,
anywhere,
yeah, yeah.
and that there's power in that there, and I think that can be a problem to some people, but for us, for those of us that want to see the country stronger, you have to realize that the people that are here are the ones that are going to make it stronger. You don't do
Mm,
that by removing folks. That's never been a way to make the nation
right.
better.
Embrace your neighbor. Embrace and
Mm-hmm.
understand the differences. Embrace the differences and giving permission to ourselves, license, giving agency, all of those elements resonate. And any last words before I close us out?
Thank you very much. I love the conversation. We could go on for another hour,
Yeah.
man, just talking about these
Yeah.
ideas.
Yeah.
And I guess the last thing I want to say is this is not a solutions book. The first book had some policy recommendations at the end. This one is a book that tries to bring the reader into a set of experiences
Yeah.
so that they can get some semblance of a shared experience for something that they didn't themselves go through, or if they have gone through it in a different way, then one voice in a set of shared experiences that where some of it may resonate. So it's meant to make a human connection over the question of race and democracy and police and government and voting and purpose and national identity and again make it human sized. So I hope y'all will go out, grab the book, gift the book. I hope you enjoy it. It was a labor of love, and one I'm super proud of it, and hope you guys enjoy it.
You should be proud. I would tell everyone that it's a collection of essays. It moves like that, and so it's a weekend read with a lifetime of resonance. The points take you through someone's life, and you connect with it. And so, thank you for your time. And I'm going to
Thank
close
you.
out. On behalf of Florida Humanities, the Village Square, and our streaming partners, we'd like to thank you for joining us tonight. Good night, everyone.